At this point in time, tonight's talk is being delivered over the airwaves, radio style, without a visual image, due to unexpected discrepancies in the camera operating visual image producing mechanism. And so, because of that, this talk is being laid down in another way, and that is for the ear. And hopefully, this in and of itself will provide a view, an inner view, a view within of the theme and the subject matter and the story that we'll be considering. Spiritually speaking, the art of poetry, the spirit of poetry, approaches becoming or being a scriptural art when it takes into itself the way that we remember sacred stories and sacred teachings or sacred presentations or sacred mythical presentations and stories. So it's only natural that we consider the story of the awakened one, of the Buddha, of Shakyamuni, the sage, the mind of the Shakyas, of the Shakya people, of the Gautama clan was the Buddha, the awakened one, the one who was to become the Buddha. Of the Shakti clan was he born, of the Gautama line, and his given name was Siddhartha Gautama of the Shakya clan. Born a prince and destined to become a king by Kshatriya, the warrior caste, the ruling caste, a certain kind of warrior aristocracy, the Kshatriyas. And in the ancient tales of India, the Kshatriyas are the warriors, and the rulers and the ones who give us the drama of struggle and of conflict in these characteristic mythical ways. But the myth of the Buddha, though Siddhartha Gautama was born a Kshatriya, is a different kind of story, because the foes that Siddhartha grew up to vanquish are the things that ensnare us all, the finite travails that we go through, birth, old age, sickness, death. These are the things that were the obstacles to understanding, and also the incitements to search that made Siddhartha's story different from a warrior song or something like this. It's also, I want to say though, also an introduction, a story of how knowledge is passed down from generation to generation, a scriptural art. How can we describe the way that the impressions were made on the mind of humanity? Why has the story, in other words, why has the story become so archetypal and so memorable? In what way does it work? It has as its center, the story, that is, it has as its center the personality of Siddhartha, the one who became the Buddha, the one born a prince of the Shakya people in what is now northern Nepal, the one who had every circumstance of luxury and delight surrounding him, but also this heavy kind of auspicious and strange mystique of certain aspects of the greatness of his fate, which caused his father to be rather worried at times, because it seemed that the picture of the fate as foretold, as cast for this individual, this baby, Gautama, Siddhartha, when he was first born, it was like there were two ways his great destiny could unfold. He would either become a universal monarch, a ruler of the world, and a great one, or he would become something entirely different, but something entirely different and yet just as great, only in a spiritual sense. He would become a teacher of the world and show people the way to overcome birth and sickness and old age and death and ignorance and all the obstacles to complete liberation of the human mind and heart and soul. But this was a strange fate. This troubled his father. He wanted his son, obviously, to become a king like him and to carry on the kingdom. He did not want him to leave his home and travel the roads of the world and become homeless and sleep in caves and be, what, a teacher? A teacher of what? Because you see, meditation was not for the Kshatriyas. It wasn't like that. Now, they were highly cultivated and highly educated in all the martial skills and also the skills of governing and philosophy also, but statescraft kind of philosophy, but of actual meditation and of spiritual education, that was more the province of the Brahmins, a different caste with different functions, and so it wasn't the proper destiny for a Kshatriya, and the tradition was so heavy at this time in this part of the world that his father did not want his son to leave and become a teacher. He wanted him to stay and become a prince. And then that's part of the drama of the story, of course, because the pampered prince sees things that disturb him. He sees examples of the travail of the world. Even as a child during an agricultural festival, the prince is invited to watch, as an honored guest, the first breaking open of the ground, the first seasonal plowing of the fields. And young Siddhartha, as he watched, he saw the suffering of the ox straining under the yoke, the lash of the whip wielded by the plowman, who himself was struggling under the hot sun with the sweat pouring down his back, as the plow broke open the ground. And oh, the breaking open of the ground? What travail, what disruption that caused for the home of the ones who live in the ground, of the worms, of the roots, of the seeds. They're suddenly churned up, broken in half, their homes destroyed, turned upside down and thrown into the world in the furrows. And look above. After looking below, look above and see what gathers above. Ah, the birds gather above. Birds of prey, circling and swooping and diving onto other kinds of birds, birds who were attracted to the broken open ground, the seed-eating birds, and the birds who love to eat the worms that are suddenly made available to them by the plow, breaking open the ground. And of course, they themselves become prey for the predator birds, for the eagles and the hawk. And all of this, all at once, was brought before him, young Siddhartha. It was a hot day. He turned away. Or he didn't exactly turn away, or perhaps he did turn away from the suffering of it. But he also found a certain way to hold his perception before himself in a way that his mind could understand and begin to see with the eye of understanding. That is, he took refuge under the shade of a rose apple tree. And it was just, even though he was a child, it was a natural thing for him to assume the meditative posture and enter a state of meditation, though he had never been taught or never had been trained or an example of that had never been shown to him. It had been kept away from him. But there he was, expressing such gravity and radiance and perfection in placement and poise, that people around noticed it. And they also noticed the tree was helping. The tree threw a shadow upon the meditating figure of young Prince Siddhartha. And the shadow did not move, though all around it as the day progressed, the other shadows moved. The shadow that the rose apple tree threw to protect young Siddhartha from the harsh rays of the sun did not move. And this was something that sticks in the mind, you might say. Now, I'm only talking about just the tiniest part of all the legendary mystique surrounding not only Siddhartha's life, but all of Siddhartha's previous lives. But these are ways it enters the consciousness. These become part of the silhouette of this character, of the Buddha, of this personality, of this literary figure, of this mythical figure, of this example of the scriptural art of presenting a story and preventing its being forgotten. Presenting a story so as to prevent it from being forgotten by distilling such an essence of memorability that it is held in the imagination of the entire species as a gift given from the Spirit, as an example to be contemplated and understood through all different kinds of languages and all different kinds of literary presentations and all different kinds of eras. And it is formed of these memorable, strange details, I guess you might say, which I'm relating to you now. Now, it's also well known how as Siddhartha grew, he did begin to get glimpses of the world beyond his cloistered one, his protected place. And he saw examples of the suffering of sickness and old age and death. He saw individual manifestations, and he would ask the people around him, what is this? What is going on? He wasn't supposed to have ever seen this stuff, but of course it was inevitable that he would. And he also saw, and this is also important to remember, that Siddhartha's destiny, though so singular in and of itself, can also be said to arise from a long and eons old, prehistoric even, meditative tradition in the place where he grew up, among the people that he grew up with, which had a history going back into prehistory, where it was given that it would be handed down through generation after generation, all these techniques and customs of meditation and prayerful concentration as just a simple human art that was developed and has been around ever since any other human endeavor has been around, the spiritual search, meditation. So young Siddhartha, disturbed by these examples of life's transience, also saw examples of those who walked with a different kind of bearing, of the mendicants, and they were around, of the forest hermits, of the homeless wanderers who lived a life away from the household and devoted themselves to the contemplation of the eternal verities. And sometimes in some places, kings, after they had ruled in their career of leadership, would enter the forest as hermits, but only after, when they were old. Siddhartha was destined to leave when he was 29 years old, when he left the palace and began to wander. Or was it really wandering? It was more like his resolve was such that it led him to become a mendicant himself. He had to learn a whole different way of living, of dressing, of sleeping, of bathing, of eating. He had to learn, because that was his life now, how to eat only what he was able to beg from people. And people would give. That too was a custom. You offered food of your own to the hermits and mendicants and monks who came to your door and stood silently with their begging bowl out. And it was a part of the way that a householder could fulfill an obligation to the spiritual world by offering food to the monks who came by. There was a whole custom and decorum to it, but it was still an irregular kind of way to have to eat. And he had to learn how to eat food that he did not like or maybe was not the best. And he had to learn how to sleep outdoors. And he was no longer a prince anymore. But still, there was a certain aspect of his bearing that continued like a diamond to cut into the perceptual thickness that surrounded him as he moved through the world, so that there are certain kinds of encounters, human encounters that he had that we can contemplate now and come to a different kind of understanding of his effect on people, and by that of the dedication of his personality to the search for spiritual truth. Once he had gotten used to being a wandering mendicant and begging for his food and living outdoors, he gravitated, I think, south and east into the land called Magadha, the kingdom of Magadha. He left the land of the Shakyas, his own people, and in this other kingdom, he was going. Something was beckoning him. There were more mendicants, and there were more like established teachers of meditation that were in these places. And there were other reasons why it was more conducive to live as a monk, as a homeless monk. And he found a place, I think it was on Mount Pandava. He found a place, a cave, and he would meditate untrained, untaught in the cave. And he would go into the local city, Rajagriha, I think is the name of it, and beg for food, and then he would go back to his cave and meditate and live the way that he was living. And attention of that was brought to the king of Magadha, whose name was Bimbasura. I think that's his name, King Bimbasura. And King Bimbasura came to visit him and called out to him, "Honored homeless one, everything about you indicates that you have a different kind of fate. Your bearing, even as you sit in meditation, speaks to me as a Kshatriya warrior king that you, monk, are of my own kind. And why are you so young? And what are you doing there in that cave meditating? You should be leading legions. You should be running a kingdom of your own. Tell me, what was it that drove you from your palace home? Because I know that's where you came from. I can tell by looking at you. Were you too impatient to claim your inheritance? Was something troubling you and driving you away? Or were you cheated out of your kingdom? If you were, I offer you my armies. We will march together and we will win back what is rightfully yours, if that is the case. If not, come down now and rule half of my kingdom with me. I offer it to you just like this." And he called out this way, this advice and this encouragement. Or is it encouragement? It's advice. It's an offering. It's a declaration of allegiance out of nowhere. And the one meditating answered and said, "It is not armies that I seek. It is not a kingdom that you would understand. I am Siddhartha Gautama, Prince of the Shakyas. I have left my kingdom to conquer a different kind of enemy. I have been disturbed by a vision of the pain of existence, of birth, sickness, death, old age, all of these afflictions, and they are what I seek to vanquish. The army that I have is my own mind and my own inner self. And that is my way now. And Bimbisara, he had never been spoken to this way before, but he was able to answer and say, I wish you well in what you seek, and should you find it, please come back and teach it to me. And this is what a king said to him, and this was before he was the Buddha, you understand. This was before he was enlightened, but still there are these human encounters that become eternal. They are eternal because I'm telling you about them now into your own listening ear. And but he also knew in a more humble way that he needed to learn, and it would be helpful for him to learn from a teacher. So the Buddha to be became a student of two meditation teachers that are known to us, even though this is 500 years BC. One was named Arada, and one was named Rudrika. Arada and Rudrika. First he was enrolled in the school of Arada. And Arada, this is the meditative tradition that I was speaking of earlier. This is the Upanishadic kind of understanding of life. Upanishad means, I believe, at the feet of. So, in other words, someone attending to a teacher. These are taught by the human voice to the human ear, spiritual matters. And it's a long and deeply philosophical and very refined tradition. But now meditation, as Arada taught it, involved, sequestering oneself, moving away from distractions, the hypnotic manifestations of the things of the world that lead us to create a sense of self and cling to that sense of self. But what meditation taught, as Arada gave it, was one turned away and found a quiet place to oneself in solitude, and there the mind would dwell free from distractions, and the accustomed hustle and bustle and mental activity would give up their hegemony, and one would be able for a little while to experience the natural peace and quiet and richness of the mind, and then one's thoughts might begin to take a turn toward a wholeness of contemplation, and at which point then this would be meditation. And then they spoke of the stages of meditation. Now this is how many thousand years ago, and the different stages of meditation and refinement of perception until the notion of the one who experienced the peace of non-distraction would be shed like a chrysalis or a snakeskin, and one would go on further into the highest refinements of understanding until there was no notion but complete and utter awareness, boundlessness, and yet at the same time the particular was also there. All forms and all manner of vibrations were held in understanding, and this was taught by Arada. And the young Buddha to be assiduously studied and went through all these processes of meditation and was able to recite the doctrine and understand the doctrine. And then that led to the practice, that led to the awareness. And this was what Arada taught. And after a certain time, though, the young Buddha to be realized that there was more for him to learn, or that there was something else that he needed to pursue to bring further into the existence of his mind, this ultimate awareness that he was looking for. And so he left the school of Arada and he went on to the school of Rudraka. And Rudraka taught a similar kind of process of meditation, but I think he went farther into this whole notion of the perceiver and the perceived as being something that were one dissolved it as a mental form by seeing into its essence as a form, and then kind of like devoting one's energy to seeing beyond it, so that this notion of a perceiver or the perceived, this dichotomy or whatever you want to call it, would fall away. And all of these things. So these are the inner meditative things that the Buddha to be learned. And when the time came for him to leave these teachers and go into a different way of living, an even more intense understanding, a more intense practice of life to satisfy his vision quest, that when he turned away from these schools, having learned from them all that he was destined to learn, that's when he went deeper into the forest. That's when he went into the really remote kind of regions geographically. And that's when he began to experience the depths of his mind in such a way that he would be walking in the forest and he would be walking in the deep, remote places, and things would become scary. Fears would arise. Every rustle of every leaf, every trembling of every shadow, every snapping of any twig. And he would stop. And he would pause. And he would listen and look within to see in what way that fear had arisen in him. And when his mind had conquered that fear, you could say, when his mind had understood that fear, or when that fear went its way and his mind was aware of that, only then would he move. But now you understand, he was walking in these scary remote places, and he was attending deeply to fear as it was manifesting in his consciousness. But it was from within that he was doing this. It wasn't like reacting like to the external threats as a Kshatriya warrior. It was more like someone looking from within their mind and stopping and waiting for that fear to change, and knowing it's changing only through his own awareness. And then he would move his physical form and take his next step on his journey. And this was how it was for him. And he also then explored his fear more deeply, because there are spooky places out there. There are shrines, and there are grave sites, and there are haunted places that are known in all these different ways among the peoples, with the knowledge of the people, not only those who were living off the land, but also those who were farming the land, and also the tribal peoples. And they have their long traditions of ghosts and things. And he would go and to the places that were known to be haunted, and he would wait and meditate and stay with it until there was some kind of resolution or understanding. Either the thought would go away, the vibration of it would fade, or he would attain some understanding of it, of these different kinds of fears, each one different, that arose within him as he went on his way. And so this was part of his journey then. After formal meditation study, then was the time of wandering in the remote places and coming to understand the eerie things. And then came the point where he began to, this too is part of his culture at the time. All around him, especially in certain places, were different kinds of spiritual seekers who practiced different kinds of practices. Some meditated in caves, sitting quietly, and some practiced these really severe kind of austerities, these ascetic disciplines of putting their bodies under extreme duress, for example, so as to gain power and understanding over the most intense pain, physical pain, standing under the hot sun, standing surrounded in a ring of fire, standing on one foot for all of one's life, or lifting one's finger into the air, or carrying heavy weights on the back, or putting sand in their shoes, or any number of things, austerities, physical punishments, you might say. Why? Because for some, in some sense, and that's a whole other story, the way the mind may be attracted or driven to extremities, sometimes without knowing it. But these were ascetic disciplines. Always, it was subjecting the body to a trial so as to educate it to become aware of a different dimension of existence. And the Buddha became involved in this also. As he put it, monks, he said this later on, monks, he would say, in my youth, I tried to conquer the mind with the mind. I pressed my tongue so hard against the roof of my mouth, gritting my teeth, closing my eyes, bearing down with all my might, trying to subdue my mind with my mind. I held my breath, he said. I stopped up the breath of my mouth and my nostrils and felt a terrible roaring in my ears. So I stopped up my mouth and my nostrils and my ears and felt the heavy destructive winds moving through my body and blasting me. I felt the heat of this strain, and oh yeah, I was mindful of that pain, to endure it, yes, one-pointed concentration, certainly, but it all came from the tension in my mind. And in another sense, I found myself realizing I was squandering my life energies that could be directed in a more skillful way toward the attainment of understanding. Oh, but it's not that I didn't persist in this. I ate only what the wind would blow into my lap, and if it was dust or if it was a few seeds, or on a good feast day it might be an acorn or something, and if the wind did not blow anything into my lap, I did not eat that day or that week. I got so thin that my arms were like stalks of bamboo. I got so thin that my spine was like a ridged piece of wood. I got so thin I could touch my belly and feel my backbone, or touch my backbone from my back and feel my belly. I suffered. But for what purpose, ultimately? To learn of the futility of it, I say. And but even then, the Buddha would have this impression, would make this impression on people, even practicing these austerities, so much so that his mind and body were completely absorbed in this strange concentration. Other fellow ascetics did gather around him, and drawn by something in his bearing, but also by the reputation that he had already acquired. The one who had mastered so quickly the teachings of Asita and Rudraka, and the one who before them was practicing austerities in such an extreme way that they could not match it. And so they were drawn to be around him by his authenticity. And he was inspiring to them in some way in their own spiritual search. 5 other ascetics. One of whom, strangely enough, Kodanya was, it is said, one of the Brahmins, one of the young Brahmins who attended to Siddhartha when he was first born and was among one of many of the seers, and astrologers and wise men, who this particular Brahmin, Kodanya, was one of the ones who predicted this, that he would become a great spiritual teacher. And later on, this Kodanya became homeless himself, homeless in the sense of becoming a wandering mendicant, and was practicing these austerities. And lo and behold, there came to him one day, or he came to one day, the one now grown that he had prophesied would be the great world teacher. And now here that one was now as a young adult practicing these austerities in such a severe and inspiring way. And so Kodanya, and there were 4 others. They were kind of this original group of, would they call themselves disciples? We could call them disciples. Perhaps we could call them students, or maybe fellow ascetics, or there's any number of ways we could describe them, but they were a community of sorts for a while. Then there came something that changed all that, and that was the realization that took hold in the Buddha to be that these austerities were a waste of energy and were a needless suffering and a distraction from what really needed to be undertaken, which was something along the lines of a practice that would not be so hard on the body. And so that was when a new step was taken, when Siddhartha turned away from these severities and remembered his childhood when under the shade of the rose apple tree he attained a certain kind of natural peace of mind that he could come back to and practice with renewed energy, and that this would lead him toward enlightenment in a way. It was like the realization came to him, the time came for that realization to be there, and then that realization came. And so he resolved then to end his austerities and to seek a good place under a nice tree to meditate and reach enlightenment once and for all. And so when he did this and turned away from the 5 others of the ascetics, they shunned him when they saw him begin to eat, and when he went farther away from them and into his own kind of path again, they were glad to see him go, because in their fanatical minds, you might say, they thought that he had betrayed his austerities, and they could not stomach that. And so then Siddhartha, the Buddha to be, took their leave. And that was when one day, sitting after waking from sleep, where he had dreamed a series of prophetic dreams, prophetic in the sense that to the Buddha to be, they meant that he was actually close to attaining his goal of liberation. He dreamed, I'm relating to you, a sleeping dream of the Buddha to be. He dreamed that he was asleep. In the sleeping dream of the Buddha to be dreamed he was asleep. And he was. He was asleep, only he was immense. His head, the pillow, was the Himalayan mountain range. His left hand lay in the Eastern Ocean, and his right hand spanned the world and rested in the waters of the Western Ocean. He encompassed the world as he was sleeping. And he next dreamed that a vine, an endless vine, was growing from his belly. Something like the god Vishnu, who dreams of the universe emerging as a lotus from his navel. But in the Buddha to be's dream, it was a vine emerging from his center. And to him it meant that not only would he attain knowledge, but he would also bring forth the way to this knowledge. That was the meaning of that dream. He dreamed that there were bugs crawling up his feet. And there were bugs. They had white bodies with black heads. And they were bugs crawling from his feet up his legs all the way to his knees, swarming over his legs. And he took this to mean, these are the monks. These are the ones who will gather around me to learn the ways that I have found freedom for myself. And he dreamed of a bird of 4 colors, or was it many birds of 4 colors, coming to him and turning white. All the colors gone into one. And this meant that, from me will all the castes learn and will be one in their seeking of understanding. All the castes, the warriors, the Brahmins, the merchants, the servants, they will all learn from me. And he also dreamed then that he was walking on a hill of dirt, but not becoming dirty. And by this it meant to him that his material needs would be satisfied, but he would not be attached to them. And these were the dreams that he dreamed. And these were the meanings that he assigned to those dreams when he woke up and reflected on them. And he was deep in his reverie of the understanding of these dreams now that he was awake. And when he opened up his eyes, there was a beautiful woman standing before him dressed in blue, who offered him in a bowl the finest milk from the finest cows and the finest honey, the finest wild honey drizzled over the finest grains of rice and given to him as a meal. And he ate. And this was like he had never eaten so well since the time he was a child. And when he ate that food offered to him, this purified yet rich food, it was like when this was a further confirmation of his resolve not to punish the body anymore. But the energy that this food gave him was also another sign that he was focusing his approach to enlightenment and was nearing it and within striking distance, you might say. And that is when that's when he came to the Bodhi tree and sat down under the tree and attained enlightenment during the night and in the dawn, and achieved the vision of the utter liberation for all beings in this world. And of this I will tell you just a little bit about a certain other kind of mythical figure, because aren't we, in a certain sense, we are experiencing this mythical life sometimes in a very personal way, and sometimes in a way as if we were there, and other times as if we were kind of like trying to understand in a certain kind of way the effect that he had on the people around him, and why this becomes the substance it becomes the fabric of the story of his life and his thought, which then goes on to change form within us, in our own contemplation. But there are other figures, I guess you could say, that figure into this search and this quest, and so what I'm talking about a personification, a mythical personification of all the obstacles to enlightenment that exist. I'm talking about the devil, you might say. I'm talking about the thought twister. I'm talking about the wrongdoer. I'm talking about Mara, the nemesis of Buddha's quest for enlightenment. Mara, the tempter, the persuasive twister, the distorter, the voice in the head that puts you against yourself, the voice in your head that subverts your desire for truth, and the voice in your head that takes power from your from the dominion of your divine consciousness in so many ways. The mind of pain is the mind of Mara. And Mara has a role to play in the drama of the life of the Buddha to be. And when the Buddha sat down under the Bodhi tree with this momentous kind of auspiciousness of intention, that vibration passed through all the worlds and all the dimensions of spiritual and mythical existence and came to the attention of Mara. And Mara realized, this cannot happen. If this one becomes enlightened, this will be the enlightenment that enlightens the world. All of my power would be gone. I depend upon the non-existence of the human awareness of truth. For my own energy, I, Mara, will not allow this. I will stop that one from achieving enlightenment. So Mara laid out, played every trick in the book to try to distract the Buddha to be from his meditation. But none of it worked. Not the seductive allure of the offerings of a life of luxury or power, not the intimidating threats and accusations and aspersions and attacks upon his character, not the conjuring of illusion after illusion to drive him away from his point of concentration. None of this worked. And all of Mara's wiles, Mara's weapons, Mara's arrows, Mara's rocks, Mara's army of misshapen and grotesque demons, Mara's harsh and sharp and bludgeoning weapons, the tremendous cosmic storms that Mara brought down, not a whisper of the wind of Mara's hurricane so much as ruffled the hem of the Buddha to be's robe. All of the arrows changed into flowers or lotuses and fell at his feet or simply disappeared on the way. And when Mara realized that he was beaten, when Buddha put his hand upon the earth and said, "The earth witnesses for me in my right to be here, in my incarnation after incarnation where I have embodied the highest virtues, every particle of earth witnesses for me." And the earth spoke from within itself. And that was the answer to Mara's last challenge, when Mara said, "Who witnesses for you?" And Buddha put his hand on the earth and says, "The earth witnesses for me." And when the earth witnessed, in its many, many voices, that's when Mara knew he was beaten and simply disappeared. And then the stages of meditation came. And then during the watches of the night, Buddha's mind, or Buddha to be's mind became Buddha. That mind became awake. And the Buddha to be became the awakened one, the Buddha, the Tathagata, which means the thus come. And the Tathagata, which Alan Watts translated as da-da-da-da-da, which means there, or here it is, or he is, or the thus come. I mean, that's the actual translation, the thus come. And this in and of itself is a certain kind of teaching, is it not? But then, yes, the causes of birth and old age and the liberation from suffering and the way to the understanding, all of this appeared. The knowledge of his past lives, all of this became part of the enlightenment of the one who is now the Buddha. And it is said for 49 days after his awakening, he continued to meditate around in that particular part of the forest, in different places nearby. And there were times when, in his mind, it was he had resolved he would not teach this. This was not something that could be taught, and because of this, he resolved to just abide in this understanding and not set forth to teach it, because it could not be taught. And this is when another level of the mythological kind of thing kind of unfolds, and because it is said that who was it that inspired the Buddha to actually teach now once enlightenment had been attained? It was a god, Sahampati, I believe was the name of this god. It was from one of the Brahman heavens. One of the things that we are reminded of in the cosmology, the assumed mythological cosmology of the background, so to speak, the poetic, spiritual, scriptural, artistic background of the silhouette of the Buddha's character, is there are these certain kinds of heavens with certain kinds of gods. Sometimes human beings could be reincarnated as those gods, and the Buddha himself in previous lives, perhaps more than one, was a god in some of these heavens. You see, was a god, and so the thus come, the Tathagata, is also the embodiment of a god, as a human can be, of a certain kind of God with a certain kind of understanding. I just want to say this. Anyway, so there was one of these gods from one of the Brahman heavens named Sampati, who came to the earthly Buddha and implored him on one knee and with his hands pressed together in a salute, at chest level, with his head bowed. A god implored this human Buddha to turn the wheel, to teach the Dharma, the law, to teach it to people out of what? Compassion. Out of compassion. And this was what inspired the Buddha to begin his earthly life of teaching what he had attained for himself. Having liberated himself, this was the arising of the mind to liberate all others, you see, which was inspired in him by the action of a god. And so that was when he set forth. And he wondered who he could teach and who would be receptive to what he had to teach. Well, he thought of his two teachers. He thought of Asita and Rudraka. But now, with the psychic gifts given to him from existence, now he saw, sadly, that Asita had died a short time before, as had Rudraka, and he could not teach them. He knew that they were no longer alive for him to teach. And so he went back to the ones he had most recently meditated with, the ascetics. And when they knew he was coming, they did not want to see him because they thought that he had abandoned the way. But as he came into sight, they saw by the way he walked and by his bearing and by the light coming from him that he had attained liberation. And it is said it was one of them, one of his original ascetic community, who asked him, "Are you a god?" And he said, "No, I am not a god." "Then what are you?" "I am awake." And Buddha means awake. And he taught them. And what was it that he taught them? He taught them, it was this formulation now. This is also an interesting thing. It's a simple thing, but I come to it and think about it again and again and again. All this nebulous talk about enlightenment and all this changes into a teaching. Is that what it does? It becomes this form, a literary form insofar as it involves words and language, by which this way to understanding is expressed as a gift to the human race. And it's the Four Noble Truths. This is what the Buddha taught to these original five. The Four Noble Truths. The truth of suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path to see, to not suffer, to live a good life. The Four Noble Truths, and it's endlessly, it's really specific in so many ways, and yet it's endlessly. One will never exhaust the richness of it, and this is why it becomes a teaching. Then, and this so this was the beginning of his life of ministry, and it went on, and he lived to be an old man. The Buddha did. Traditionally, it was said he was 80, and what he did at that time, he meditated, he continued, he taught of the practice of the discipline of meditation, but also of the daily conduct of the monk in the living of the monkish life, and of the rules of order for the community, and the practice of compassion and being of benefit and service to the beings in the world around one, of the cultivation of the mind of the Buddha, of the mind of compassion, of the mind of insight, of this kind of like particular form of gifted living. This was the nature of what the Buddha taught. But how can it be conveyed? I can just give you a taste of it. Let me pause a moment and think of the way, something about the life, the way that Buddha taught after this. How can it be conveyed? Well, let's put it in a mythical sense for a bit, and I want to just provide this for you. He moved in all these circles of society. He did come back to Bimbisara, and now that he had become the Buddha, and now he taught Bimbisara, and this became in Rajagriha, back in Magadha, the kingdom of Magadha, and this became one of the first places he established, or places that he established where he could teach and abide for a while and live there with his sangha, his community, which was ever growing as people came and became monks or students of the Buddha and what the Buddha was teaching. And he did a lot of walking, and he did a lot of talking. And the ways that his discourses were remembered and contemplated have become part of the literary arts of oral memory, oral recitation, and of certain memory kind of practices to enable these scriptural utterances to become scriptural, and to either as oral scriptures, oral utterances, or as written utterances. They were written down on leaves, the Pali tradition, in the language of Pali, which is a Proto-Sanskrit, or a Sanskrit kind of vernacular, which is probably the language that the Buddha spoke in. Maybe not Pali technically, but another kind of language. Maybe some say we don't really know what language Buddha originally spoke in. And yet, all of this content is received and carried down in these certain kind of ways that in and of themselves become arts, and arts of memory and understanding and contemplation, as is meditation, as is education. These things are arts. So in this sense, we can understand these scriptural arts as these religious arts, and then we can consider the spiritual nature of the poetic gift as this human form, this spiritual form, this artistic form, this, and yet, so in that sense, that gives us a way to understand religion, I guess, or perhaps religion gives us a way to understand art, or poetry gives us a way to understand this particular mind of the Buddha. But these are generalizations, aren't they? So let me tell you something more specific. They were fire worshippers back then. This is also India. You see, the forms of meditative understanding and the forms of religious ritual have much to do with many of the elements, but among them there is fire. And it was like there were fire worshipers, the Vedic sacrifices, the whole world surrounding the actions and activities of the Vedic body of understanding involving fire and the way that the fire is the purifier, the transformer, and the lifter of human energies up into the heavens, the medium by which human consciousness can communicate with the realms of the gods and the dimensions beyond through fire. This takes many, many forms, refined philosophical forms, ritualistic Brahmanical forms, as well as folk forms and tribal forms and pagan forms and all of this. But fire is central to it all in its light and in its heat. Well, so among Buddha's, many in Buddha Sangha were from different forms of fire worshippers and ascetics who carried on austerities involving fire, or those who worshipped ritually through the maintenance of certain kinds of fires, or just many, too many to count, but it all involves fire. There were the Kashyapa brothers. I'm thinking of the Kashyapa brothers. Yeah, Kashyapa Uravila, Kashyapa of the river, Kashyapa of Gaya. And some say they were brothers, but they all had the same name, and Kashyapa. And they were fire people. They tended their hot coals, and they communed with the fire in caves. And one day the Tathagata came amongst them, the Buddha, and they knew of this teacher, this spiritual being coming toward them. But they were convinced that their own way, of course, was the superior way. Isn't that the way it often is? And when he came, he said to them, let me worship with you. And they said, in that cave, there is a snake spirit, a naga. And that naga, that snake being, is dangerous and will devour you. Don't go in that cave. And the Tathagata said, I will go into the cave. He asked permission in the way of that holy men ask each other permission, and they allowed him to go into the cave, though they did not expect him to come out of the cave. And inside that cave, the Tathagata, he began to meditate. And the very act of meditating incited the snake spirit within, who was kind of a fire snake spirit. First, the smoke came forth from the snake. The snake had the power of producing smoke to overpower the energy of meditation. And the Tathagata responded to the smoke with smoke. And the smoke of meditation overcame the smoke of the snake spirit. This caused the snake spirit to burn. And the Tathagata answered the burning of the snake spirit with the burning of meditation. And fire went against fire. And the fire of meditation scorched the snake spirit, but did not harm it, but overcame the snake spirit fire. Meanwhile, outside the cave, the three Kashyapas saw the inferno and tumult coming from within the cave, and they thought, alas, that handsome mendicant will be destroyed inside of that cave. And even now, they thought, he is being destroyed. Listen to the sound of thunder and tumult and the flashing of infernal fire inside the cave. But then with the dawn, the Tathagata emerged from the cave, and in his begging bowl was a small snake. Yes, the Tathagata had reduced the naga, the snake spirit into the form of a small snake inside of his begging bowl. And the fire worshippers saw this, and they were impressed. They knew he had great power. But even then, they thought that their way was superior. And the Tathagata abided with them and participated with them in their feasts and in their lives in many ways, and impressed many of the people all around who came to learn. But still, the Kashyapa brothers did not think that he was the one who had attained ultimate liberation, nor that they should be his students. But the story goes on and on. Strange kind of miracles, came and went. Sometimes they could not split wood, and then the Tathagata would come, and then the wood would split by itself. Other times they would offer great feasts, and the Tathagata would go into certain eternal planes and find a different kind of food and come back nourished in a way that they could understand and yet not understand. And still they thought that they were the ones who had the superior way. Eventually, what was it that convinced the fire worshippers that the Tathagata was the one who had achieved ultimate liberation? It was speech. When the Tathagata finally just spoke to them and said, "You are not liberated." And then he began to expound the Dharma to them. And it was only then that their eye of understanding was opened in a different way, and they turned away from fire and miracles and supernatural signs and wonders, but to actual understanding of the way that the good life actually manifested in daily life. And in this way, they became students of the Buddha. This is a way to understand that the way that the Buddha worked in the world. But that involves, of course, these mythical kind of subduals of snake spirits and things like this. There were other ways that the Buddha taught that was more suitable to those whose minds did not gravitate as much to the supernatural realms. And these were the ones that he would offer direct succor and sustenance, bread for the hungry, for example, or comfort for the grieving, or medicine for the sick, or succor to those who were in pain. And this became the teaching, you see. Well, there's so much more that I could tell you. Let me check the time. The time tells me, oh yes, the time tells me that I can mention a little bit more about the nemesis. I can mention a little bit more about the nemesis. Mara would sometimes come to the Buddha anytime, really. And the Buddha was always able to not engage with Mara on his own terms, but to recognize who Mara is. And always then Mara would turn away. But Mara would sometimes offer hints of the preciousness of life when, in order to inspire fear, not to teach about the preciousness of life per se, but to inspire fear with a vision of like comfort and safety. And or sometimes he would appear to Buddha and say, "Well, aren't you lonesome now? Or didn't something drive you away from home after all? Why are you out here?" And the Buddha would always say, "Mara, what I teach, you cannot perceive. What I understand, you cannot understand. Mara, what is real is not known to you because you depend for your existence on misunderstanding." And Mara would try every trick in the book, and the Buddha would see through him because it was part of his discipline and part of his understanding to understand the cunning ways of the egoic mind, of the mind of pain, which is personified as Mara. So many of the stories of Buddha and Mara have this as their theme. It is said After Mara once again realized that he had no existence as Mara, he drew in the dust of the ground 16 lines. Mara made a drawing in the dust of the ground of 16 lines. And 10 of the lines were the virtues that the Buddha practiced, that Mara did not. And other of the lines were lines representing Mara understanding that he did not have the compassion, the tender compassion of the Buddha. Mara understanding that he did not have the understanding of any true idea. Mara seeing that he could not produce supernatural miracles. He could only produce the illusion of any number of cataclysms and miracles, but not real ones. And Mara understanding that he did not know the true nature of beings, that the way that the Buddha did. Mara's understood or knew or drew a line representing that he did not know the characteristics of beings, of being as being, because it was not his nature to have that understanding, because he has embodied illusion, the personification of the obstacles to enlightenment. And yet here he is in our imaginations right now, drawing 16 lines in the dust. And this is part of the mystery of the Buddha. But time passed and the Buddha got old, and he would get sick sometimes, and his attendant Ananda would massage his limbs. But even when he was old, even when he was 72, he faced a schism within the Sangha, brought about by a different kind of nemesis, someone whose name I haven't mentioned until now, Devadatta. Actually, Siddhartha's cousin, Devadatta, became quite a charismatic monk himself, but his intentions were not those of one who was enlightened. He conceived a desire for fame and power, which led him to deceitful actions. That's a whole other story. And he incited an actual schism within the Sangha, and he even tried to assassinate the Buddha 3 times. Once by an assassin sent by a secret trail up the mountain to where Buddha was meditating in a clearing in the forest on the sides of the mountain. And this assassin was sent by Devadatta, who posted another assassin on the trail to await for the assassin he sent, who would kill the Buddha, come back down that trail, and be killed by this other assassin in order to keep the secret from being told. And it is said that there were even more assassinations against the assassins further on down the trail. But basically what happened was the would-be assassin came to the Buddha, who was meditating, and saw in his repose, by the Buddha's repose, his consciousness was changed, and he realized that this was not a thing that he could do. And he confessed to the Buddha that he had been sent to assassinate him. And the Buddha understood and said that the true understanding of the right actions brings forgiveness of the confusion that led you here. And now I bid you to go and be free, but by the way, don't go down that trail. Don't return by that trail, because there is someone else there waiting for you, sent by Devadatta. Go home by this trail. And so the Buddha, after teaching him the Dharma, forgiving him, showed him the safe way back home. And so these were kind of things that happened. There was another time a maddened elephant was incited. A maddened, drunken war elephant was incited to charge the Tathagata. in town, in the city. And the Buddha met that charging elephant with kind of a energetic field of love and understanding, so that the elephant slowed its charge and ended up bowing down to Buddha and lifting up with its trunk a handful of dust from near the Buddha's feet and pouring it down over his own head. And then the elephant got up and walked backward all the way back to its stable and was tame after that. There's another story where Devadatta rolled a boulder down the hill toward the Buddha to crush him. But the boulder was stopped by another boulder, but a splinter of that boulder did fly into the Buddha's foot and actually wound it deeply. And the Buddha meditated in the lion pose, lying on his right side, and meditatively endured the pain and got better. And the schism was put away by the teachings of two of Buddha's disciples, Shariputra and Madhgalyayana, who were able to preach the Dharma to some of the Devadatta's disciples in such a way that their minds were opened and they understood and saw the error of their ways. Things like this happen. Eventually, the Buddha, at about the age of 80, he one of the tales that is told, he still lived by begging, and he ate some bad food, some bad pork. And he ate it and realized that it was bad and ordered the rest of the pork to be buried in the ground, but that made him sick with gastric distress. And these were part of the circumstances that led to his parinirvana, his passing on to deeper fields of understanding. But the end of his bodily form came about under those kind of circumstances. And that's where the story ends. But that's also, of course, where it begins again, because the mind of understanding is not born and does not die. It constantly lives amidst all the changes of the world, teaching and edifying and going on and on and on. And this is just a taste of it. This is just a piece of that knowledge. This is just a breath of that knowledge. These are a few stories that I have told you this evening, and a few thoughts that I have been glad to express to you. And I hope that it is worthwhile to contemplate, as it is worthwhile to me to tell. And so for that, I thank you for your heroic listening and say to you, so long for now.